Okay, good evening. Welcome to this session on engineering cross-border innovation synergies. So I'm sure all of you will agree that in a world where technological capabilities are widely dispersed across different geographies, there's a important need for different companies, different countries to collaborate, work with each other. It's often said that no organization can have all the knowledge it requires within its boundaries. And therefore, over the last couple of decades, we've seen the open innovation movement, we've seen a lot of collaboration between industry, academia, other kinds of research organizations, and so on. So clearly, in a world where data and AI are also becoming much more important, in fact, almost dominating the whole innovation scenario, clearly they will also be playing an important role in both influencing as well as being a central core part of what's happening on the innovation landscape. So let's explore some of the challenges in making these cross-border innovation synergies work, and what are some of the success factors that are involved in making collaboration successful? How do we measure whether a particular partnership has been effective or not? And what are some of the safeguards or precautions we can take to protect IP and manage some of the other challenges that typically come up in cross-border collaboration? So that's broadly the landscape of what we will be discussing in this evening's session. To do this, we have a set of wonderful panelists. They each come from a different domain, from a different geography with different experience. So we will be taking advantage of their expertise to put together this panel in an effective way for all of you. And we look forward to active participation from all of the participants on the floor in the discussion that follows. Let me quickly just introduce our panelists, and then we will jump straight in. So to my extreme right, at that corner, is Gil Elmalem. He is the R&D attaché at the Embassy of Israel in Delhi. And he runs a lot of very exciting collaboration programs between Israel and India. And he'll be giving us some insight into those programs as we go along. Seated next to Gil is Priscilla Fasoro. She is a partner in Covington and Burling from the US. She is an attorney, and she's going to give us a lot of insights from her legal experience of working with clients who've worked extensively on various cross-border deals, particularly in the IP and collaboration space. In the middle, we have Stefan Metzger, who is the co-founder and CEO of Beyond Civic in Switzerland. He was just telling me about how he does some really interesting work in getting different regional players to work with each other, particularly when a lot of urban centers are very close to each other near international boundaries. And there are a whole lot of challenges that come up, and he's going to tell us something about that during this session. Then we have Aruna Schwartz, who is the co-founder and CEO of Stele Technologies right here in Bangalore. And she also has worked across in different geographies, working largely in the software domain, but with a focus on defense tech. So we're going to have the advantage of her insights. And to my immediate right is Dheeraj Tiwari. He is the co-founder and CEO of CapGrid, which is a relatively recent company, but it's already making rapid strides in aggregating manufacturing and meeting the requirements of large companies, particularly in terms of gathering together components from different MSMEs and then putting them all together at scale in a very efficient way to provide what the large customers require. So he is also going to share with us some of the emerging challenges that he sees in this, particularly when you look at a cross-border kind of context. So I'm going to start right from the end. I'm going to go back to Gil, and I'm going to request him to just give us an overview of how he looks at this entire cross-border synergy between different partners in innovation and what has been his experience and his learning so far. Gil, over to you.
Thank you very much. So again, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Gil Elmalem. I'm serving in the Israeli Embassy as the Research and Development Attaché, and I'm representing an organization in the Israeli Ministry of Defense known as the DDR&D, the Directorate of Defense R&D. In Hebrew we call it Mafat. It's basically, if I'm comparing it to India, the simple equivalent will be the DRDO, but it won't be accurate. Basically, the Israeli DDR&D is a combination of the DRDO, the CSIR, ISRO, and IDEX, if you take all of them together, because Israel is a small country, size of Kerala, with population of 10 million in a good day, so we need to be more efficient in that matter. So we have one organization that encapsulates all of it together. Now, as an organization of a small country, we have to collaborate with the world, and I think it's irrelevant of the size of the country. Every country needs to collaborate. No country can work only alone and to be so completely self-sufficient. Israel, when we established in 1948, right after India, also after the Brits left us, but the Brits were in our country only 30 years, so the damage was contained. No offense for British in the crowd. So even back then, when we were all under siege and boycott and everything, we still had some collaboration with the world, not to mention today. So my organization sends people like me to several countries in the world, naturally in the US, and we have a representative in Europe, myself here in India, and another one in Southeast Asia, in order to create those kind of synergies and collaborations in R&D that will benefit for both countries that we are collaborating with. I'll take it in a personal view to here in India. We are running a program called Drishti. Drishti, by the way, in Sanskrit means insight or vision in that case, where we are bringing 10 Israeli startups in different stages of maturity, from an early stage to a more advanced stage, and we are creating them the platform or the launchpad to collaborate in India. We are engaging them with small companies, with medium companies, even in some extent to larger companies, and help them to navigate their way in India in order to create this bilateral collaboration. We think it's imperative and there is no other option, because even though there is the Atmanirbhar Bharat and self in India and self-reliance, which is important because country would like to protect itself from any problem in chain of supply or weather or whatever, so country would like to have this self-capability, but still the collaboration is mandatory. And with to summarize my opening, every country, I believe, should map its strength where it has the ability or where it has the edge of other countries, and map its deficiencies, and then to find another country that can complete each other. And in Israel and India case, Israel has a lot of IPs. We have pretty good idea, and unfortunately we have also a lot of experience in the battlefield, including as we speak now. So bringing this edge and combine it together with India, with a massive population of engineers, of high skill, of smart people in big quantities, ability to produce in mass numbers, this kind of collaboration is basically the edge for both countries, and this is what's happening and part of what I'm doing. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. So I think Gil made a nice strong case for people and countries complementing each other with the relative skill sets that can then add on and create value for both the partners together. Thank you, Gil. That was very useful and interesting. Can I turn to Priscilla now? And you, with your rich experience as a lawyer working with different parties across the world, do give us some sense of, from your perspective, what are the success factors? What really makes this kind of collaboration successful? And what are some of the challenges that come up, and how should we be looking to protect ourselves against some of the problems that may come up?
Yeah, well, thank you, Professor Rishi, and thank you, everyone, for being here and for having me. As you stated, my name is Priscilla Fasaro, and I'm a partner in the Technology and IP Transactions Group at Covington and Burling. We're a global law firm, and my practice really focuses on helping companies work together to accomplish their goals with respect to IP, data, and technology. So to your question about, what are success factors when you're working cross-border, I think of a few things. The first one I think of, which is the most important, is stakeholder buy-in. This is really important for any transaction, but when you are going across borders, you need to know that the tone from the top is set and that both parties have the buy-in of high-level executives and people who are really going to be responsible and will own the project. Too many times I see projects fail because there really is no interest. There was someone on the business development team who thought it was a good idea, who knew someone at the other company who thought it was a good idea, but the people who are really holding the purse strings and really directing each company aren't really into the idea and aren't really willing to stick it through. The second success factor I often see is there needs to be a shared vision and aligned objectives. So there has to be a very clear vision for both parties on what will make the collaboration successful. So what does success look like? Is it a product that actually works? Is it a regulatory filing or regulatory approval? Is it sales? Is it onboarding a certain number of customers? Is it creating something together? If these things are not aligned and if there is no real clear focus on what a win is, people will get distracted, there will be a lot of money expended, and at the end, no one's really going to be able to say, whether or not this thing was successful. And then those stakeholders, it'll be really hard to communicate with them about why they should continue to support this project. Related to this is that all collaborations, to what Gil said, there has to be a win-win. So both companies on both sides need to come out of it feeling like they've gained something, especially where one company is a smaller startup and the other is a more big established company. Too often I see startups say, I want to work with this big company because then I'll have them on my customer list, or I get to talk about having this customer when I go talk to investors. That is not enough. That doesn't directly add to your bottom line. And when you consider how much effort and time you're going to have to expend working with these big companies, because they are very demanding. And as we heard yesterday, sometimes they often treat you as a vendor, which means, it's a completely one-sided relationship. When you're entering into a relationship like that and you're not getting clear wins out of it, it oftentimes is not really worth the effort, and you don't end up with what you thought you were going to have. Following up on that, not only does there need to be a win-win, but each party needs to understand what a win is for the other party. So I need to know from my counterparty what it is they're expecting out of the relationship and what they expect to be a win, and they need to know that for me. This happened very recently to me in a really large deal. I was representing a large pharmaceutical company that was entering into a deal with a biotech company. The biotech company was providing IP. My client, the pharmaceutical company, was providing money and manufacturing. They had a cancer drug that was highly successful. As time went on, the biotech company became really hard to work with, and eventually they threatened to terminate the agreement and take their IP back, which was a big surprise. But it turned out that for them, a win was learning how to manufacture a drug product. It wasn't the money that they were getting. They really wanted to eventually stand on their own and develop and manufacture their own drug product. And they saw the relationship and the collaboration as an opportunity to learn from my client. They weren't getting the access to the people that they wanted, to the know-how that they needed, and to the learnings that they expected. And so they became incredibly frustrated and wanted to terminate the deal. It took a lot of time and money and effort to repair that relationship. But had we known that that was a success for them, it would have saved a lot of time and headache. Finally, I think strong communication is especially really important. And specifically, it's really important not to hide things from each other, especially when you have what we call bad facts. You really want to collaborate with this other entity across the border because you really admire them and you think if they know what your capitalization looks like, or the fact you're getting sued here, or the fact that, the regulatory clearings are looking a little shaky, they won't collaborate with you, so you try to hide that. That is never, ever a good idea because things always come out, and depending on the timing, it can spell disaster for the relationship. And once that mistrust is there, it's very hard to repair. This also happened to me a few years ago, where we were at the 11th hour about to sign a deal, and it turns out that our counterparty had signed a contract with a third party where if we gave them our IP, they could give that IP to a third party. And this was very sensitive proprietary information. And this came out at the 11th hour. And so all of a sudden we had to deal with this very large issue that eventually actually got someone fired. So had we known that in the beginning when we went into the relationship, we would have still proceeded with the relationship, but we would have gone in eyes wide open, fully trusting and working collaboratively with this counterparty. The deal still did get done, but it was a very rocky relationship and continues to be a very tough relationship for both sides.
Hey, thank you, Priscilla. That was very useful and very insightful. I think we've got some real practical knowledge now into how to make these things work. So, Stefan, if I can just turn to you now. I think one thing which fascinated me about what you were telling me is the importance of data and, how integrating data or using data, creating the right platforms is so important for these innovation synergies today. So do tell us something more about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, well, basically data, of course, is just one source to do innovation. And I think it gets even more important as it comes to this era of AI. But basically, what we are doing, we're a Swiss-based startup helping mainly the public sector establish data ecosystems, cross-organizational data ecosystems, but even more also cross-border data ecosystems. And, well, as within one of our main and maybe major project, we are helping a Swiss city pretty close to the border to Germany and France, setting up a data ecosystem. You can imagine it's not that easy because public sector is not allowed to just store data outside the country. So we had to find a solution that it works. And, as you can imagine, it's not just about setting up contract and having like common goals. It's quite a lot also about, sharing common sets of rules, how to collaborate. And even more as, such ecosystem has quite a dynamic structure. So it's not just a one-off, let's build it, let's draft it, and let's run it like it is for the next 10 years, or maybe even longer. So we have to find a somehow a structure, a solution, how to somehow work with this complexity, with this the three different national laws, but also with the dynamic of such an ecosystem. And basically what we did, but we are not doing cross-border innovation, but we are helping our customer to build it up. So what we have chosen, and we found some very nice somehow methodologies and logics in the governing the commons work from Elinor Ostrom. And well, at the end, what we ended up is in a three-tier methodology. So of course it's based on technology as well, but first of all, because we have to discuss about contracts, is about finding common bases, setting up a common understanding, common rules. So that's like the first level we have to achieve, we have to address. So we set up a code of conduct, like a common understanding, which includes even the process, meaning that, participatory decision-making, because that makes your whole governance to some extent dynamic, because you're still in a process, including all the different stakeholders, that you can improve over time the whole ecosystem. And only then, at the second stage, we've got the legal binding contracts. And we try to keep them as limited and as focused as possible to the real data sharing, because that makes us flexible on the ecosystem itself. And then, of course, you've got technology, and the technology at the end has just to follow that structure. We have to somehow cope, build it up to really make it happen that the data sharing will take place. So that was at the end quite a challenge, because you can imagine that there is some regulations, and even more as they have the intention to include even the private sector as well, because they have got some internal regulation maybe as well. And we have to somehow deal with these challenges and complexity. And that's what we did in a metropolitan area, pretty close to the border. And but basically learned quite a lot out of that. And I think we can somehow use these learnings also to set up dynamic cross-border data innovation, like collaborations and also like, ecosystems. And then, of course, as soon as it comes to data, it gets even more complex and it has some, some regulation, privacy issues, etc. And we really have to keep that on the level of the data itself, because if you have a contract which tries to cover it all, it does not really work, or it is too restrictive. So we really have to find quite a dynamic and fine granular way of like addressing contracts to specific data sets. And so that's what we did, so that we can also make data available, for example, for research institutes on the other side of the border, and maybe even more to train common AI models on data, not just from one city, but data from all the 3 cities, or maybe even more. So that's basically what we're doing. I think that's quite a powerful approach, and also a pretty new approach, that combination of soft law on the top level, like legal aspects, contracts on the medium level, and at the end, a highly trusted technology on the ground level, which just sets the foundation of such ecosystem.
Thank you. That fascinating, particularly when you see the role that data is playing and how data is being integrated by different partners in different ways, and yet you have to make sure that each partner's data is kind of safeguarded in its own way. I think it's a really interesting emerging area. So thank you. And can I turn to you now, Aruna? And you've worked across borders with Europe and India. You've worked in both civilian and defense technologies. Do give us some perspective on how you see these innovation synergies working across borders.
So in my opinion, there shouldn't be any borders for software transactions of technology. Can you hear me?
Hold the mic closer.
Take the mic closer.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. I'll move forward. So as I said, in my opinion, there should be no borders for software. It has to be a borderless world. So my first big experience of a cross-border technology transfer was 10 years ago, when it just wasn't cross-border, it was a cross-continent company transfer. So we were set up as a French company, and I moved the company to India 10 years ago to work with a very large defense customer, the Indian Air Force. We had to be an Indian company. So moving technology is not just moving a technology and the IP, which of course was very important because we had defense customers. Is this better? Okay. Because we had defense customers in the EU, and we needed special permission from the French government to be able to move the IP to India. But besides that, the most important thing was the customers. It was a very intense 3-month period getting the whole thing sorted out. We had big name defense customers, Rolls-Royce, the Naval Group, etc. So getting their buy-in that we would invoice from India. And maybe 10, 12 years ago, to be brutally honest, India wasn't kind of the hotbed of software innovation, but we had to convince them it was the same team. It was me, my CTO, who's French. So moving the customer contracts, different tax systems, because in Europe, well, look how borders have changed. 10 years ago, the UK was still in the EU. And we could, we had customers there, so there were like tax treaties. What our European customers were super excited. If you export software from India, there is no GST, there's no VAT. So getting all that, and the most important, getting the buy-in of, I have 26 shareholders from everywhere in the world, is to get them to agree to be investors in an Indian company in a country where, let's say, 60% of them had never even set foot in. So achieved all that in a period of 3 months. So the technology is important, but it's not just technology and it's not just innovation, because innovation without customers, real pain points to solve, and without making money is, there's no point in being the founder of a software startup. So now our challenge as an Indian company, what we're doing is striking partnerships with complementary technology vendors who are across the world. So Siemens is one of them, Dassault Systems, PTC, etc., etc. Most of the big maintenance platforms that are complementary to us are not in India. So again, as Priscilla mentioned, contracts are important, IP contracts, that because you're always in a David Goliath scenario, that you don't get swallowed up, your IP isn't stolen, all of those things. So contractually very important, but finally, more than contracts is the identification, definition of common pain points in a customer, that both are technologies wherever they reside. So us in India, the others around the world, that we can solve a real problem and make money. And the other most important thing is the people in the partnership. Big companies always have paid forever lip service to working with software startups, open innovation, co-innovation, joint innovation, etc. But there has to be the right people in those companies who want to make it happen. And it's not just about innovation, it's actually getting purchase orders for your product from the business units, which is the bigger challenge. So even the big companies have a challenge to get their businesses aligned to their corporate innovation team. I can give you some examples where the corporate innovation team pushed us, without even talking to the business units, and how that seriously backfired. So, you can talk to me about it. So innovation, selling software has to be a global business. Of course, I will never give my IP to anyone, anywhere in the world, to any other technology company, unless they're going to pay a few $1 million, or rather tens of $1 million to acquire us. Thank you.
Thank you. That was also very interesting, giving us a new perspective, particularly looking at it from the software point of view. Let me now turn to Dheeraj, finally, who is in a very interesting space of aggregation for manufacturing. Dheeraj, tell us what are some of the issues and challenges you face there in creating these cross-border synergies, and any insights you would like to share with us?
Sure. Thanks a lot. I'll talk about what we do and then correlate that to my customers, how their products are changing, and how cross-border synergy or collaborations is helping them, and where we play a role primarily. So I run a startup called CapGrid. It's an acronym of Capability Grid, which is basically manufacturing capability grid, which we are building here in India right now. Previously, I've worked with a large consulting firm for about 9 years, spending a lot of time in India, US, and Japan. We primarily set out to build this to solve this problem of manufacturing with great OTIF, on time and full, and great quality, leveraging the Indian MSME base. And I would say in a 3.5-year journey, we have been successful in doing that. We are also funded by one of the event sponsors, which is Axelar Venture Partners, which is one of the VC funds, along with Nexus and Anicut. So today we supply about 5,000 to 7,000 components every month to about 20 odd customers, which are spread across automotive, consumer durable manufacturing, automotive OEMs, as well as tier ones. And if you think about it, how my customer's product is changing, there is a lot of push on software-led products, which is leading the change in the final product which is happening. Now you have remote, or you have an app to monitor your fan, your AC. there is a lot of push on sustainability, and then there is a lot of push on value engineering, which is leading to three main drivers which my customers are seeing. One being, there is a player which brings in a software capability in the product. It may be a supplier, it may be a software provider. There is a player which is bringing in IP-led hardware into the product, which is some special heart and core of the product. And then there is a capability which is ability to do large scale manufacturing with great throughput and great quality. These three are the main levers I see where a cross-border synergy is required for my customer. And and there is a lot of action happening as well if you think about it. I mean, I just pick some examples. We all know EV is the big thing. EV needs a motor needs a magnet, right? And magnet is concentrated in a couple of geographies only. One of the companies, which is Sona Comstar, we do have their chairman as one of our angel investors. So they collaborated with a company called Nexus from Europe, which is helping them to build magnetless motor. And that technically will decouple a lot of these dependencies with the concentrated source of magnet. We all know the Mahindra story. Mahindra used to be down at number 5 and 6, and they used to get beaten on design, right? I mean, they had great products, but then they were not aspirational, and that's when they acquired Pininfarina, and we know as per May sales, they are the number 2 automotive OEM in India right now. So it does pay, of course. How I am trying to leverage that in my business, and this is the last part of my kind of opening on this, is we are helping our customers get IP, which is a foreign IP manufactured in India with all the protections around it. We are also trying to import an IP, not necessarily manufactured in India, but a technology which exists outside of India, but they are not able to import it. We are able to leverage our scale across customer to import that product, which is IP led, and supply here to them in India. And we are able to allow China plus one, or like I said, diversify the risk of concentrated sourcing for certain categories of components. So these are the three ways how we are able to work with our customers in leveraging cross-border synergies. Talking about IP, Priscilla talked about that. We have actually built in our product a mechanism through which an engineering drawing which comes from my end customer doesn't need to be downloaded, doesn't need to be shared over email. You cannot take screenshot of that. At best right now you can definitely pull out a mobile and take a picture of the computer screen, but then you cannot, no one needs to download it, be it my customer, be it my team, or be it my supplier. That's our kind of mini step in trying to prevent the proliferation of an engineering drawing which holds the IP for a part. But we are also trying to push consistently on how we can protect the IP part while that design is traveling across multiple stakeholders. That's my bit on this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Dheeraj. So I'd request all of you to please get ready with your questions, because I'm just going to do one quick round of one question each to each of the panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you. So let me start with Gil. Gil, I'm going to ask you a tough question. So the tough question I'm going to ask you is, India and Israel, in some sense, are quite complementary to each other, the way you mentioned. But culturally, we are very different. At least that's my experience whenever I've had opportunity to work with people from Israel. So from all your experience with Drishti and these creative programs, what are some of the secrets to getting India and Israel to work together well on the cultural dimension?
Well, it's an excellent question. I'm here in India for 3 years now, and I'm working with India for basically 3 or 4 years before that. So I have some experience with India, and I can say that in a way the cultures are very similar. For example, the family structure. We are also in Israel and in India, the nucleus family of the grandparents and then the parents and the grandchildren. in Israel, it's maybe not in the same house, but it's in the same city or neighborhood. And since Israel is very small, so it's basically in the same location. And also in the warmth and in the less formalities. And also I can give you something, it's a 100% checked. If you will go anywhere in the world, enter a restaurant or a library or whatever, and you will hear noisy people, it's either Israeli or Indians, for sure. So we are married like, but on the other hand, there are differences. We need to be also honest about that Israelis are much more direct, much more to the point, and much less patience, while with Indians, well, you know, it's different. It's exactly the opposite. So this is, by the way, the role of people like me, and I'm not alone. I have many people who are the same, and also Indians that does the same work in Israel that are bridging this gap, because I think that the similarities are larger than the differences, and it can be bridged relatively easily with the right attitude. For example, in Drishti, when we're bringing the companies, I'm always giving each company before every meeting with Indians, I'm giving them some kind of a preparation, telling them how they're responsible. For example, I'm always telling them Indians are very, in that case we are similar, very good with hospitality, very nice, very polite, and very smart and curious. And I tell my Israeli companies, listen, if they were nice to you, smile to you, and asked you very good questions, it doesn't mean that the letter of intent or the contract will be on the first meeting. No, it will take some time. You need to understand that. But those things are solvable. I think that basically the fact that many contracts are signed between Israel and India is a proof that these gaps can be bridged.
Thank you. That's very, very, very fascinating. Yeah, let me turn to Priscilla. So Priscilla, you were telling us about some of the success factors, but do tell us a little bit about the safeguards. You know, if you really want to protect your interests and at the same time make this innovation happen, what do you need to do?
Yeah, so obviously as a lawyer, I will say the contract is going to be the most important thing. You want a really strong, robust contract that, you know, covers things like IP, confidentiality, revenue sharing, data security, and data protection. But, you know, even the best contract in the world isn't enough because, you know, companies do breach contracts, unfortunately. And so you need to think strategically about how you're going to protect yourself. So I really enjoyed what Diraj was saying about, you know, finding a way to take customers' IP and not necessarily download it. You know, find a way to make them comfortable and understand that when they give you their IP, you know, it's safe with them. And so I think people need to think more about due diligence. So before you get into, you know, a contract with someone, especially if you're sharing something that's very proprietary, very sensitive to you, you know, having great IP protections in a contract is fantastic, but you really need to do your diligence, especially if you're going into a country where maybe IP protections aren't as robust or where there are, I'll say, obstacles to you enforcing your IP rights. So if you go to a country where, you know, IP theft is very common, and it's hard for you as a foreign entity to go into that country and get that company to stop abusing your IP and stop using your IP, even if it's protected by patent, even if you've got a really great contract, you know, you're in trouble. And so I think of one example where I represented one of the largest consumer brands in the US, and they needed to work with a manufacturer in China who was going to be manufacturing a component for them. And in order for that Chinese company to manufacture their component, they had to share very sensitive trade secrets. And so, you know, we had a really robust confidentiality agreement. It was ironclad. It was perfect. But then we had to strategically think through dispute resolution. So worst case scenario, if that company does start to infringe on our IP and start to use it, how do we go in there and stop them from doing that? So you have to start to think through, okay, well, we can't sue them in the US because the chances of a court in China recognizing that judgment are very slim. So we need to go through arbitration. Okay, but where do we do the arbitration? We don't want to do it in China just because we want to make sure that it's a level playing field. So actually we need to do it in Hong Kong because if we get a preliminary injunction in Hong Kong, we can actually enforce it in China, and the Chinese courts will actually recognize it and respect it. So it's thinking through things like that, doing your diligence ahead of time before you share things, before you enter into agreements are incredibly important. And one other thing I'll mention too is thinking through what happens when the relationship ends. What happens when either the contract ends naturally, there's a termination, or if you're dealing with a smaller company, what happens if it goes bankrupt and no longer exists? Thinking through what it is you need when that contract ends in order to continue to manufacture or sell that product is incredibly important. So, if it's a software company that you're working with and they're providing software that's critical, consider, starting, putting up an escrow where they deposit their software into that escrow, making sure that they're constantly updating that escrow, and there are clear triggers where if something happens, you get that software and you get to use it going forward. Another thing to also think through is if your counterparty has key relationships with suppliers, you want to make sure that if the contract ends, if they go away, if they go bankrupt, if they disappear, that you can step into their shoes and take over those supplier relationships. So it's thinking through things like that and being proactive and doing your due diligence is the best way to protect yourself.
Okay, good. That's very helpful. So let me turn to Stefan. So Stefan, you described for us this very well-structured 3 layers of governance. So could you just elaborate a little bit on that? What role does each of those levels play, particularly when you're doing this kind of data-based collaboration?
Well, I guess it covers somehow exactly these challenges, that you can somehow address IP protection, but still not somehow confuse the collaboration too much, because it can block also quite a lot. So if it's always about that fear that you're going to lose IP, maybe you do not even start that trust-based collaboration. So that's the reason why we definitely need that top layer, setting the rules of the game. It includes even a dispute resolution, for example. So what happens? It needs a monitoring, etc. Because every somehow participant of such an ecosystem should somehow act according that commonly set up rules. So I think at the end especially in Europe, many people think they can somehow cover that by just building up smart technology, but at the end that's not the case. So of course technology has to follow that structures, but most of the projects really fail because that top layer is not even there. So as soon as it comes to dispute, there's the only way is going into a legal fight with and you cannot get the IP back, etc. But the idea is really that you can start this negotiation, the dispute resolution already before a conflict is created. And that's the idea, that makes you flexible, fast, but also quite lean. It's not a need of highly complex structures, because you already, quite often it's just a misunderstanding to some extent, maybe some misalignments, and it's so much easier to somehow solve these misalignments on that soft law top layer. And that's exactly what we're going to do, because contracts, to adapt these contracts is not smart enough. And even more as it comes to AI, right? You have to be super fast in adapting these, because nearly every second month there's some new rule setting based off the possibilities and opportunities which AI brings. And that's exactly what we try to somehow cover with that top layer, to be as flexible and as fast as possible. But yes, without contracts it doesn't work. But it needs somehow a smart and a well-balanced kind of structure where you've got these soft law rules and still legally binding contracts, because without that you cannot build trust. But you have to somehow really find that smart balance for that.
So Aruna, how would you measure the success of a partnership? What are the kind of metrics you use when you try to figure out whether it's worked out or not, or it's working out?
Well, the most important is the people that I work with. I mean, if I think they're fools right from the start, that thing is never going to work. Or if I find them unbearable, however great the technology is, it's going to be a real push. So people, most important. And of course, all the good things about customers, use cases, pain points, technology. But the most successful, the best ever partnership we worked with are with the people that we really like. And more important, like is irrelevant in business, people that you respect because they share your same values, that there is integrity, there is depth, and for me, the biggest quality is I can only work with unpretentious people. So there we go.
Sure. Dheeraj, what about you? What's your metric for a successful partnership?
See, I mean, I would just break it to the project level. I mean, just to give you an example, if I'm looking to localize a certain component which is being imported by my customer, I think at a customer level, what percentage of imports I'm able to localize at an industry level, what percentage of localization are we able to achieve? For example, in the last session, Mr. Mohan Das Pai talked about one of the large import bills India has is electronic component sourcing. And with the large subsidies now being planned, right? I mean, I think we just need to measure 5 years down the line how much that import bill has reduced. So I would just pick a project, see what impact it is
You're
creating.
talking like a consultant, I can see. Good. Okay, so now let me just open it up. If we have any questions from the floor, if there's a specific panelist you would like to address it to, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll try to direct it to the right person. Yes, ma'am, please go ahead.
Thanks everyone for this insightful session. I think my question is more to what Priscilla and Stefan said. I've been recently part of many deals where foreign entities want to collaborate with Indian entities for their data, and as we all know, given India's population, there's no dearth of Indian data available. But what's happening in these deals are that the Indian entities typically don't have a win-win. They get the money for the data, and the foreign entities don't really show up as a true partner. And innovation happens abroad based on Indian data, but that's not really then the Indian entities don't really benefit. So given where India is at today and where we want to position ourselves, A, what strategies can India adopt? And second, how can you think, countries abroad can show up as a true partner rather than just collaborate with India for the data?
Sure. So I think Priscilla, I think she's addressing it to you.
Yeah, sure. So, working on the legal side, I'm not really a business person, but I will say that the relationships that I see work the best, it's kind of going back to the example I gave where it's making sure that each party knows what a win is. And sometimes, it can actually be, companies being taken along with the bigger companies. So to your point, it's, you do these deals and at the end you kind of leave with a raw taste in your mouth because, yeah, maybe you made some money, but you didn't really accelerate your growth or you didn't really unlock a new level of understanding or a new segment of customers that you were hoping to get from that. And oftentimes these companies that come from other countries and come across border, they have different ways of doing business. They have different mindsets. They have different access to, to broader markets. And so sometimes that could be what you can get from them. And that's how they can show up to be real partners. So maybe it's not just I show up, give you money, take your data and go, but it can be, I bring you along with these learnings. I show you how to unlock different markets. It's not that I'm going to do the work for you, but I give you access to, I become like a knowledge partner to you. And I sort of show you how to innovate. I give you, I don't want to say ideas because people are very reticent about sharing IP, but I kind of unlock different ways of thinking for you. And I give you access to things that for me isn't going to cost a lot of money or take a lot of time, but could be, a big differentiating factor for you.
So I would suspect one of the important things is to build good learning mechanisms. If you just go backwards in time, when Indian markets opened up in the 90s and early 2000s, you'll see a lot of foreign companies came into India, and the foreign companies learned very quickly from the Indian companies and how to do business in India. But the Indian companies at that time at least were not as adept in learning from what the foreign companies were doing. Offline, I can even give you some specific examples. I don't want to name these companies right here, but there are plenty of such examples. And one of the reasons was the Indian companies didn't put in place the right mechanisms to quickly absorb whatever the foreign company was bringing in so that they could use it for themselves. So you have to make that investment. But some countries are very good at doing that. If you look at Korean companies, to a large extent Chinese companies, they're quite quick at learning from the others and just taking that knowledge and then moving forward. Okay, is there anyone else who has a question or any comment? Yes, please. Yeah, Madan.
Yeah, question for the startups on the panel. I'm Madan from TIE Bangalore. Which are your favorite events or exhibitions to go to get leads? Are we getting through event saturation these days, or how do you optimize your experience at events and conferences?
Yeah. Dheeraj, directly to you and then to...
Well, the only events that will bring you a customer are the trade shows. So I normally only go to aerospace and defense events, and only as a speaker, because being lost in the mass is not going to help you. And the second thing is, if you are going to take a booth in one of the big aerospace conferences, with the kind of budgets that startups have, you'll probably be placed next to the toilets. So that isn't great. So the best and smartest way to be present at a trade show, besides being a speaker, is to be on the booths of a large partner, which we were at Aero India with Dassault Systems. So if you want to make your buck last longer, that's what you need to do.
Dheeraj?
Yeah, I mean, we do go to trade shows a lot. We started working with automotive companies, so Auto Expo, which happens every other year in Delhi, that has been an important event. When you are a relatively smaller company, you do not expect people to really know about you and come to you. So we have been doing this dual strategy that we will take a prime real estate for a large logo, maybe near the gate, and then a very small stall. Because what we are selling is the knowledge, right? I mean, we don't own manufacturing facilities. So that has worked well in India. We then diversified to consumer durable. We went to one of those shows as well. This year we are focusing on global. We went to Hanover Messe actually earlier this year. We put up a small stall there. So trade shows are great, of course, but you have to do a lot of legwork there. So my experience, typically people don't show up so easily. So you put one guy on the stall and one guy has to keep on running and figure out whom do we catch and bring on the stall.
It's easier if you're a woman. You don't have to go to them.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we have time for one last question, if anyone would like to ask one. Okay, good. So then I'll just try to wrap up the whole thing. Yeah, so far, I think we had a really interesting discussion. So I'll just summarize a few of the things that I learned from this discussion. I think the first one, of course, is just the importance of having good structured programs for collaboration. That's something I picked up from Gil, and particularly looking for the kind of cultural fit, understanding each other well so that you can collaborate effectively and make things happen. And the kind of time he and other colleagues from Israel have spent in India is obviously an important factor towards making that happen. Priscilla, of course, true to her role as a lawyer, has given us a nice legal perspective on how to make these things work, a focus on contracts. But she went a bit beyond contracts as well. She did tell us among the safeguards is not just relying on the contractual provisions, but thinking through the whole process in detail, trying to understand the motivation of your counterparty, getting into the logic and the thought process of the partner. All of that is very important to complement whatever safeguards you have created for yourself through the contract. Stefan is talking about a very interesting and emerging area, which is the fact that there are different kinds of collaboration happening through data, but data needs special governance mechanisms. And I think Stefan described for us very nicely the kind of governance mechanisms that he is working with. Those of you who are familiar with what's happening in India, particularly in many of our digital public infrastructure would know, we have some similar kind of governance mechanisms in place, and we are trying to make that work at a national scale. Aruna shared with us some of her insights from working across France and India, and of course, working with both civilian and defense. I like the points she made at the end, particularly about how to, as a small company, look for opportunities in trade shows and so on. I think that's very important perspective on how to get better bang for your buck. And of course, Dheeraj is working in an area which is very exciting, this whole business of aggregation, which is critical for Indian small companies to get access to large markets, but at the same time is critical for the large customers to be able to get access to this huge range of capabilities and talent that's available in India. And he gave us some interesting ideas on how all of this works. So thank you very much. Thanks for being part of this panel. I learned a lot. I'm sure you did too. So maybe we can just give a round of applause to the panelists.